Domain Tools help security analysts turn threat data into threat intelligence. They take indicators from your network, including domains and IP addresses, and connect them with nearly every active domain on the internet. Those connections drive risk assessments, help profile attackers, guide online fraud investigations, and map cyber activity to attacker infrastructure. Fortune 1000 companies, global government agencies, and leading security solutions vendors use the Domain Tools platform as a critical ingredient in their threat investigations and proactive defenses. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. Are your existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Polywall by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, Polywall is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
All right, welcome back. We're going to go through what we call innovation updates and discussion around it. Let me just kind of give you the idea. So we got 10 updates for today, and as we've already said, we're trying to keep these segments a little bit tighter. Based on the programming that we have, so there's no show July 2nd. July 9th, we've got a fantastic follow-up with Edna Conway, and July 16th, we've got a double feature with a Boston University professor looking at encryption. We're excited about all those things, which means the next time we're going to update this is about a month from now. What I'm trying to understand is what you like or don't like about it, what you need or don't need. So we're going to keep the show notes kind of similar in terms of giving you links to this, ways to take a look at it, understanding funding rounds and why it might be interesting to you. And I think Paul and I are going to kind of go over what we see are more of the macro movements and some of the trends and things that we think are interesting to you. So we're going to dive into that today, and you can give us some feedback and help us tune this in better. And then we'll start seeing how it goes. Maybe we only do it once a month or every other week, or if there's big things, we'll bring them up. So we'll get it figured out. Here's the big one, and that, Paul, this was a surprise to me. Tron Foundation acquired BitTorrent for $140 million. First of all, I didn't realize BitTorrent could be acquired, so that was kind of surprising to me. And then I didn't really know much about Tron Foundation, and Tron Foundation is essentially a blockchain, cryptocurrency startup, pretty well funded. But it also looks like they've got some pretty interesting designs on, fundamentally shifting and improving the way that the internet works. So for them, this is a pretty good acquisition, and it looks like they're just going to continue it. Was this stuff that you were patched into, or how did you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the news item, come across, but I went with you, Michael. I thought BitTorrent was an open protocol with open software, and everyone just ran open relays essentially to make it happen. Apparently, maybe there's some infrastructure that supports BitTorrent that I wasn't aware of. I didn't follow the torrent thing as closely as some in our space do, and I don't follow blockchain and cryptocurrency as closely as I probably should either. So these are two technologies that I really don't pay that much attention to.
It's kind of funny that you say that, because it was kind of like my take on it too. I'm like, all right, well, I know about BitTorrent, and I know a lot of times in security we both like it and hate it. So okay, cool, let's take a look at that. And then it was, well, wait, what is this Tron Foundation, and what are they working on? It's kind of interesting. The best I could figure out looking at them is pretty ambitious, global, moving quickly, and from what I could tell, doing good stuff. So if you've got some experience with Tron Foundation, write in, let us know what you think or what we need to think about it, and we'll take a look at it. PayPal acquired Simility, $120 million. So I included this for a couple reasons. One, it's a pretty successful exit. Simility had about $25 million in funding. So when I say it's a pretty successful exit, I guess it depends on who you're talking about, because I can tell you right now that an investor is going to look at it and say, well, when I back out the funding and then I take a look at whatever the founder's share is going to be, and I take a look at ours, this is probably going to be like a 2 to 3x return. But that said, it's positive return. It's a return in the right direction. Now, we take a look at PayPal, so it's payments. We just talked about cryptocurrencies. We've got all sorts of changes awash in the payments space. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting area for the foreseeable future. And so somebody like PayPal, who's heavily invested in making sure they stay relevant, is of course going to be concerned about fraud. So they've grabbed somebody who is a fraud provider, right? Anti-fraud system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not terribly surprising, but what I want to point out again is fraud is something that we've figured out pretty well from the US-based credit card system.
Yep.
We've got a pretty good handle on it. Other parts of the world take different approaches, but now we're starting to see more and more companies that are handling authentication and anti-fraud solutions for anybody who's providing any sort of consumer or even business-to-business level credential that has access to something that they don't want it to be defrauded. I think this is just the beginning of more stuff on that, and I think most of those companies that get developed are going to exit precisely this way. I'm going to cover... Oh, go ahead. Did you have a thought?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that fraud, when we've covered it on various shows on the network in the past year or so, seems to be a very fast-moving and very innovative field, and there's a lot of exits going on. So I think it's kind of like that perfect storm where we need fraud prevention. I think there's a lot of technology that's got it figured out, and hence you're seeing a lot of acquisitions and exits in that space that I think has a dotted line. I mean, it's not completely information security related. Certainly, it relates, but it's a slightly different niche field that, again, dotted line to information security.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you what, a couple of teams I've been talking to, like when I'll say to them, hey, do you own fraud? They say, no. Should you? Well, no, someone else has it. Well, we should probably be aware of it. Right. So to your point, dotted line. And so therefore, I think it's always worth knowing about, especially if you're in a situation where somebody says, well, what are we going to do about this fraud? At least you can pipe up and say, there's a lot of startups. Let's go take a look at what some options are. All right, endpoint. We talk about this a lot here, and for good reason. There's been a lot of money behind it. CrowdStrike just raised a $200 million Series E, and they've released that their valuation. So it's $465.3 million in funding so far, and that puts them at a valuation a little over $3 billion. That's their valuation, a little bit over $3 billion. I think CrowdStrike has had challenges explaining their story because sometimes it's so are you threat intelligence? Are you endpoint protection? Are you detection response? Like where do you fit in it? And it seems like the answer is yes. But I'll tell you, a bunch of the folks that I work with that use them rave by them. They love it. They think it's great. I'm going to circle back. We're going to come back to this. Silence, same week, raised $120 million in Series E. They are hotly competitive with each other. And Silence said, yeah, we're not really going to tell you what our valuation is. Thanks so much, though. And then there's a smaller company, and I don't mean to diminish them, but there's a company called Panacea. I believe they're a UK-based company, and they closed a $10 million Series A. It's their second Series A, so it's kind of interesting based on how they did that. A lot of reasons why it could be, but they've got $15.5 million in funding. I think it's interesting because if you're Panacea, how do you compete with a Silence or a CrowdStrike that have taken on, CrowdStrike's at $465.3 million in funding. Silence is at $297 million in funding. And if you remember the original Hacking Exposed, the two of the three authors of Hacking Exposed are now running CrowdStrike and Silence. And so I think that part is fascinating. I think it's fascinating that they're rivals in the way that they look at it. But also it's the endpoint space. And I think the thing that people don't pay attention to very frequently in this space, but one of our previous guests, not future guests, well, maybe future, but previous guests from Minerva, Eddie Bobritsky, he and I have talked about this a lot. We might have even talked about it during one of our interviews with him, but there's a cost of switching out. There's a cost of putting something on your endpoint or not. So if you're already a McAfee shop or a Symantec shop or a CA shop, one of these other things, and somebody comes along and says, hey, I've got this latest, greatest technology, you should switch over. There's a penalty for switching over. And a lot of people don't. And what they're kind of waiting for is, well, Symantec's going to catch up. CA, Cisco, all these big vendors, they're going to make the acquisitions and catch up. So what I start thinking gets interesting then is, so a CrowdStrike at a $3 billion valuation, the logic says, okay, well, they're set for an IPO. And it probably a great year, well, depending on their timing.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, Michael. So, and we were talking about this in Enterprise Security Weekly. And I was like, well, I think one of these companies is going to go public, but I don't know in terms of how much they've raised. Like, is Silence and CrowdStrike both angling to go public? CrowdStrike, because they've taken on so much funding, Michael, like, are they clearly on the path to go public?
typically what happens is when you take on that much funding, you've got to go public.
Yeah.
Where things have changed a little bit now is depends on the nature of how they see their business unfolding and where they look at it strategically. So CrowdStrike was actually, they said, look, we're open. Like, sure, IPO is an option for us,
Right.
but there's been some interest from other people too. So at a $3 billion valuation, you could see a private equity play here. That wouldn't be out of the question. Now, what would a private equity play mean as opposed to going public?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I see a ton of value in that, but I'll tell you what else, right? Slack's valuation is north of $5 billion now.
Mm-hmm.
You've got major players in Microsoft, Google. I don't see this as a Facebook play necessarily, but between Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, there, HP has been making some huge acquisitions. CA has been making some huge acquisitions.
It limits your list.
Cisco is making some.
When you reach north of $400 million in funding, it starts to limit, and your evaluation is $1 billion and over. It starts to limit your acquisition to the big players, right?
You're going to be like, if this gets sold that way, right? It becomes an acquisition. That's going to be big news, and probably a pretty big win for whoever does it.
Right. Now, is Symantec in a position to buy one of these companies?
I haven't looked at their balance sheet in recent time, but sure. I mean, look, and I get it. So what I've always loved about Enterprise Security Weekly is let's call it the way it is. And I always like bringing that level of transparency here. Symantec has long held a reputation of where good technology goes to die. And I don't think it's a fair assessment. I've worked with a lot of great people at Symantec over the years that have absolutely integrated these things properly. I think anytime you deal with mergers and acquisitions, it's always going to be a little messy for a short period of time, if not sometimes a longer period of time. So do I think then like a Symantec or somebody else has the money to buy this? Absolutely. And, think about some of the companies that we've seen this year go private from public status that now have private equity money behind them that are looking for things, right? So if you start studying broader trends, private equity is still trying to figure out too where it fits. And then you have institutional investors. And then the VCs now are really honing in on security stuff. I think there is a pathway for CrowdStrike to IPO. I think there is a pathway for CrowdStrike not to IPO. But when you start looking at the differences, right? CrowdStrike's got $465 million in funding. Cylance has got $297 million in funding. Cylance to me might be a better takeover target than a CrowdStrike. But we got to see. There's too many pieces in that. And that's where I want to come back to then. When you and I talk about some of these other endpoint companies and we say, well, there's only a $10 million Series A. That's like they're way out of the game. Well, I don't know. It's going to depend on where they fit. It's going to depend on if they've carved out a niche and if there's somebody who can acquire them. Likelihood of them going public, not good. Likelihood of them being the category king, also not good. But who would you call the category king of endpoint today? Because I'd probably call it Carbon Black, who just IPO'd.
Yeah, I think it's a tough market to pinpoint who exactly is the category king. I think we have to it's such a segmented market because there's so many companies that still have some of the big players like McAfee and Symantec. And then there's quite a few that kind of spread out between the newer players that got really big. So we're talking Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, Cylance, right? Then there's like a third segment of the market, which is like everyone else. And they're kind of duking it out. So it's tough to say who's going to be the king. So my question is like, I run these scenarios through my head. Like Microsoft doesn't really have a strong product in the endpoint protection. Like they've tried to build stuff in with their Windows Defender. They've tried stuff with Emmet, and that they basically baked that stuff into their operating system. That could work for a number of people, and then they could have this other offering that's like, hey, you know what? You want to pay us X amount per endpoint to get advanced protection? Hey, look, we just bought a CrowdStrike or a Cylance or a Carbon Black, and now that's part of our offering. To me, that makes a huge amount of sense for Microsoft.
And think about what would happen if somebody like Microsoft buys it and then says, okay, it's a feature now. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And what does that do to the market for the rest of the players?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
that's the thing I think, too, that you and I have overlooked in this conversation then is endpoint standalone platform, or is it ultimately a feature set? And I think the answer on this one is yes. I think you will have some that are platform-based, and I think we're going to have some that are feature-based. And the smaller ones that are niche and really good focused on features, they'll get consumed by others. What I think is interesting, unless I'm mistaken, I haven't seen Cylance or CrowdStrike acquire anybody else for their technology or their approaches. This has all been fueled, and I almost feel like there's probably some competition between CrowdStrike and Cylance.
Sure.
And it's good for the industry. So
it is.
I definitely think.
But now what's interesting is if I look at a Symantec, right, or McAfee. And I said, well, what if they were to acquire even a smaller or maybe one of the larger endpoint companies? How does that work? Like, to my knowledge, their technologies are like totally different. Like not even in the same sport. Yeah, but keep in mind, right?
McAfee just bought SkyHigh.
Yeah, well, that's more of a cloud. Yeah, sure, okay.
But it's a CASB, right?
Yeah.
But so what does that mean? It means that they're looking at that functionality. And when they bought that, they said, hey, by the way, we're not done. Like, yeah, we'll IPO at some point, right? So keep in mind, right? So they got bought by Intel, then spun off, private equity backed. They just rebalanced the portfolio. New CEO trying to figure out their place in the market. That means they got money. Now, do they have go buy CrowdStrike money or go buy Silence money? No. Do they? Right. Well, I say no. Let me be fair.
Could be.
If it worked on paper, I have no doubt they could get the money. But yeah, how would that work? What would that change? What would that look like? I think those are valid questions. By the way, that's why I look forward to this segment, even if we only do it now on a more regular basis, because these are the things that if you're in security leadership today, you don't need to be the expert on it. You don't need to know the markets. You're not trying to figure out where to place your bets on stocks. But these are things that you need to think about if you're trying to figure out where to spend your budget or how to put it.
Holy crap, are people thinking about? I mean, I have several briefings and done several briefings talking about, well, where do I go with this endpoint thing? Like, who do I choose? I mean, there's usually like a couple of like people using the new players like CrowdStrike or Cylance or Carbon Black, and they're like, maybe I'm not happy, and do I need to switch? And then there's others that are using the McAfee and Symantec that are like, what about these new players? And migrating and navigating those waters are really hard. And understanding some of the finance and talking about like what if scenarios, I think is kind of interesting. I think CA could be a player in this space, certainly. Yep. I think they're really focused on the application, but you never know.
Historically, CA has been one of the top 5 by volume of revenue security providers in the country. U.S., I think, at least, if not globally, for like the last decade. So just because people kind of forgot about that, or they went through a period where we didn't see as much from them, they're on the acquiring spree now. They're definitely focusing on their message. And they're looking at security.
HPE has a great security division now with some great technology. And let me tell you, if you look at their portfolio of what they've built and acquired, an endpoint could fit into them because they've got a NAC and it ties into Wi-Fi. So there's a lot of potential tie-ins for an endpoint play in that as well. So I think we're going to see some of these larger companies acquire some of these endpoint providers. I think it's inevitable that we'll be sitting here at some point in the near future talking about how one of these companies acquired an endpoint company.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, too, and this is something we haven't seen yet, ADT, remember, they IPO'd and they've started to buy up MSSPs. So looking at the detection and response side. So we still might start to see where this crosses over, because now and we'll get off this arc here real quick, but now go it the other way. So say CrowdStrike, Silence, somebody else, they IPO, right? Carbon Black's already IPO'd. If you're going to IPO and say, hey, we're a platform, not a feature set,
right?
Then you have to start asking questions of, okay, what else does that mean? And you've done some great breakdowns, at least for me privately, on looking at detection versus response. And then we've done now webinars and talked to people about, well, where does case management fit in that? Where does orchestration and automation, right? SOAR fit into that? And so that starts letting us to say then, okay, so if you're at those endpoints, but you're also connected by cloud and you can protect my organization in all these different ways, well, what else can you do for me? And how are you going to help me get better? And that's where this might be more platformish, and we'll see where that kind of goes. So it's definitely going to be an area to keep paying attention to, and we'll keep coming back to it and running these scenarios and seeing how we do. Insights, $17 million Series C, subscription-based service, delivers cyber threat intelligence, incident mitigation, $41.3 million in funding. Here's some advice. Paul and I have talked about trying to do a series on marketing for security and marketing to security, and really I want it to be both. Like, if you're in security, how do you market yourself? And if you're trying to sell something in security, how do you market it to people who are in security? Telling me that you are an intelligence security provider offering subscription-based service that delivers cyber threat intelligence and incident mitigation tells me precisely nothing.
Pretty much.
$17 million Series C says you're in growth mode. You've taken on $41 million in funding.
Yep.
So you got to be doing something. I haven't come across them yet. I was kind of surprised that it was a Series C, and we had not seen anything of them. But we need to do a better job, which, by the way, is exactly why I'm building out the vendor value prop scorecard, so we can score these things a little bit better. $41.3 million in funding with that type of messaging tells me they
have acquired customers, but they're now taking on this latest round to really ramp up their sales and marketing and try and cross the chasm, right? I mean, that's
so. Let's hope they do it, right?
And
By the way,
Series C is your last ditch effort, I think, to do that.
I mean, when we're negative on this type of stuff, it's just because I'm calling it how I see it. It doesn't mean we're not rooting for these folks. And by the way, $17 million Series C, congratulations. That's a good raise. Big ID. Now, this is interesting because we talked about them a couple weeks ago where they closed out a pretty large Series A. They just closed a $30 million Series B. Now, their identity intelligence. So their idea is, hey, we're going to help you protect your information. But here's the thing I thought was interesting. If you look at the TechCrunch article that I linked to for this, there's a bit where they say, well, we have this ability to help people inventory their data. The one thing GDPR has done exceptionally well globally is it's changed the conversation. That every conversation I've had that at least wasn't, did you hear about GDPR, said, we got to do a better job taking a look at our structured and unstructured data. If you've got a tool that can go out and crawl my data and come back and give me some semblance of what I've got and how to protect it better, that's huge. So the reason that they raised their Series B so fast on the Series A is not because they ran out of cash. It's because they're onto something and they timed this, whether it was intentional or just circumstance. They are at exactly the right place at exactly the right time, offering a solution that people are asking for. And that either meant their initial investors said, "Whoop, time to go to B. Let's go push this up."
And nothing pushes a vertical in the security industry better than some type of regulation and regulatory compliance. Unfortunately, security people, we can stand up on our soapbox and preach all day long. We're only going to get so far. The instant some kind of regulatory compliance mandate comes down, that is going to spark funding, innovation, acquisition of technology, implementation of these technologies. And I think people are finally coming around to, I really do need to know what data I have and classify it and who has access and manage my data.
Can I tell you what's great about this?
Because we've always said that.
And look, anybody who's followed us for even 2 shows knows I'm not a huge fan of regulation. Because we don't define the problems we're trying to solve, let alone the solutions or value or consider impacts. And so the value prop of most of these regulations is disastrous to begin with. And as you know, because you and I have been a part of a lot of this for the last 6 or 7 months, we've rejected almost all the pitches to have GDPR discussions. Tim Chin was the first one from Domain Tools, and he did a great interview where he said, hey, guys, there's some other impacts here we got to think about.
Yeah, it was a great lens to look at it.
I'm in.
I agree.
Let's have that conversation. So now if what we're going to have a conversation is instead of saying, well, did you hear that the penalty is up to 4% of no, nobody cares. Well, someone's going to bite the dust. Yep. Also, nobody cares. Well, it's going to change everything. Well, it might. But now we're going to start talking about structured or unstructured data. Now we're going to start talking about access controls differently. Now we're going to start talking about privacy. In fact, this is going to set that stage for our July 16th interview with Professor Varia. Basically, he's going to tell us about the technological limits of encryption, and it's not what everybody thinks it is, which means it changes the way we can fundamentally have that discussion around privacy. And he's very clear. He's not the policy guy. And he's not saying he's just taking a look at theoretical of what we can do, whether it's feasible or not. It's a different conversation. Right. So that's what we're finding now. We're finding that people are getting into these conversations. And I think that fundamentally is great for the industry. The whole, it's coming, beat the drum, you're going to pay money. Yeah, I get bored. All right. Last 3 of the week. And you'll see the pattern here really fast. Inky raised a $5.6 million Series A. They are AI-based mail protection gateway, scans, identifies, and flags phishing emails. Stick with me. Tessian, $13 million Series A. They develop an email security platform that automatically prevents security threats, such as misaddressed emails and data loss. And Agari raised $40 million in a Series E, like hypergrowth mode. They are a cybersecurity firm that develops and provides cloud-native solutions to stop and manage advanced email attacks. I wish that they would have worded that differently. So what's the trend, everybody? We've now started to say, hey, what if we applied technology to phishing? I don't want to say I told you so, but thank you, because I always felt trapped, Paul. As a communicator, people will say, oh, you must be a security awareness guy. Nope. Do you understand it? Absolutely. I study human change. I study human performance. I look at our impact on systems, and that's why I've been pretty bearish on looking at all these systems. By the way, right? Bulls run, bears recede. I'm not a fan of security awareness training as the industry does it today. I'm not as vocal as some people. I think that the intentions are in the right place. I think execution is lacking. And the thing I keep asking is, wait, so you're telling me the only way to really combat phishing is just train everybody when they fall for a fish that they got fished? Seriously, we can't just solve this with technology?
Well,
oh wait, we got 3 companies now getting funded going after this. Plus, right, we've already talked to Great Horn, and they're going after the same challenge. And there's at least 2 or 3 others.
So I've been thinking about this, Michael, and here's my analogy, and we'll see if it holds up. It might not, but you and I both have young kids, right? And the number one cause of accidental death in children is what, Michael?
Drowning.
And so when we think about how security awareness or awareness training provides that, right? The logical thing to do is we teach our kids how to swim, right? Like, that's great. However, when you go to the beach, there's still a lifeguard, right? When you go to pool, there's still a lifeguard. There's still rules, regulations. There's still additional safeguards. I mean, it is great to teach your kids how to swim or to teach adults how to swim, but that's not the end all be all. Like, people will still drown even if they know how to swim, right? Because other factors could play in, right? You could hit your head and fall in the water.
Let me make your point when it comes to phishing.
Mm-hmm.
When you get honest conversations with people that do all those phishing simulations,
mm-hmm.
they find that the security team falls for it as hard, if not harder, than the executive suite.
So
wait a minute, though. We're the experts,
right? And and some of the people that know how to swim, I'm sure they drown as well, right?
I live on a beach. It happens everywhere.
It happens all the time,
who are
unfortunately.
Qualified, capable swimmers that don't make it,
but that's
even with, to your point, all those things in support.
And my point is, like, I'm not going to not teach my kids how to swim. Like, that's you're going to do that as another measure, right? And I'm not saying defense in depth. I'm saying you're going to look at the problem and you're going to come up with multiple solutions. You're not going to rely on just one. Teaching people how to swim is one thing. Having a lock gate is another thing. Having a lifeguard is another thing. And we do all those things to prevent the threat because if you're smart, you've thought through it and thought about all the ways you can prevent bad things from happening. Phishing's the same way. We're going to try and raise awareness with our users, knowing that it's not going to stop every single phishing email that comes in. We're going to apply technology as well, right?
There's in fact, let's go back a second. This is where I see these two coming together. And I promise I will not jump on the soapbox right now, but there is only one outcome from a proper security awareness program. Notice I didn't waste my time with training and education, all the other crap that everybody else gets wrong. A security awareness program simply needs to give people the confidence that if something doesn't seem right, they know who to call and what the process will be.
And that's valuable.
So notice, by the way, Paul, I didn't talk about content. Mm-hmm. Now, here's what informs the content. If you set your program up right and people are calling in, hey, this is like we just talked about with the time audit. If I keep seeing the same calls come in and in and in, then I know people are both paying attention to that and concerned with that. Now I have something that they naturally want to learn about. Is that training or education? I don't know. Show me the context. But now I can start to shift those behaviors and I can create stuff based on what people are asking, what they want, what they're interested in, and I can reduce that call volume or that ticket volume. But that's it. I just want people that, it's that whole see something, say something, which also, I know we keep seeing the stats that tell us how great that is. We're discounting a lot of stuff around that and then trying to transport that into the security realm and the technology. It doesn't work. So this is where I love these new solutions. I haven't, actually, it's interesting. For all the ones I've looked at, I've not looked at any of these 3, and I probably will now because I think it's a no-brainer. If you're in an organization today and you're worried about phishing in any variant of it, and you're concerned because despite this whole email is horrible. Yeah, actually, for every email is horrible article, we could put up 2 that say email is wonderful and people still need it. And we know that people are taxed and overtired and context switching and not always paying attention. I think these are great, and I want to see more technology like this to knock off those top things that we keep looking at every single year. Let's please get them off our plate so we can go focus on other stuff. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a great development for us.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that wraps it up, and we'll do this again in a month. So if you're loving it and you're going through withdrawal, let us know. If you're loving it but you think once a month is great, also let us know. If you want us to change something up in it or want to talk through the trends differently, this is exactly why we remain excited about this. I'm telling you right now, every security team I go to, we bring up these concepts and talk about them, and it's great for everybody involved. So I hope you guys are getting a chance to do that. We're off next week. It's going to be 4th of July holiday here in the States, and Paul and I are kicking back and taking some time with our families. Edna Conway rejoins us July 9th. We're going to talk about intellectual property and protections. She was a blast the first time, and we're already prepped and loaded. And we got a double feature with Professor Varia coming up on the 16th. In the meantime, I'm at Catalyst. Paul's at Security Weekly. You can hit us up on our show, LinkedIn. Let us know what's up. We're all over it. I'll leave you with this. Exceptional leaders elevate the people around them. So here's to your week of investing in yourself so the people around you are better as a result. See you in 2 weeks.